Paula, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me today. I just want to acknowledge that we have our capital campaign advisor, Melissa Pence from Amperage, joining us today as well. Didn't know Melissa would be here, but I may at some point be like, okay, Melissa, you're on. But also Haley Flenker is our resource development manager, and she is joined us after the capital campaign, so wouldn't have much to offer in that way, but is definitely helping us to keep the fundraising going post capital campaign. So I'm gonna it's great to see so many people here. I don't really recognize a ton of names, so I look forward to hopefully afterwards with the Q&A getting to hear from you a little bit. I'm going to share my screen. If I can find it again. Okay. It's always the awkward part. Getting it going. Okay, so Catherine McCauley Center, we are a place of welcome. We adopted that tagline after the campaign. That was actually our campaign tagline. Prior to that, our tagline was working together for an inclusive community, which was a beautiful sentiment. Loved it. Really fit who we are. But it's really hard to add that tagline onto a logo. Our logo is also new since our capital campaign because we're moving to a new building, figured new signage, new everything. We've got to just, here's our opportunity. So want to share, just for those of you who don't know who we are, and I'm going to do this very briefly because I do think it's helpful to understand just the context of who we are as an organization and our overall growth. So our mission is to offer hope and opportunity through educational and supportive services that promote stability, skill building, and connection. So I think you will find that as I share with you the different services we have, look for those elements of stability, skill building, and connection as you see them. And then our vision is that people really embrace the opportunities to better themselves, their families, and their community. We find that people who embrace the opportunities are the ones who are going to get the most out of their experience at CMC. If they don't embrace them, they're probably not going to be sticking around very long because we really do more transformational work than transactional work. So it's about people getting in there and doing the hard work to make change in their life. We have women's services, so we provide support for women in crisis and healing from trauma, from transitional housing, supportive housing, aftercare, day center, and support services. Anybody who'd like to have a conversation about any of our services after following this talk, please just let me know. Normally I'd go into detail, but again, I just want you to know kind of what we do. So we actually do have housing on site. We have education services where our clients are immigrants and primarily refugees and immigrants, as well as some undereducated adults. So with that, we provide English as a second language, citizenship, and other types of classes. And then our refugee and immigrant services, specifically, this is these services started to come into play in 2016 and really took off 2017-18. And so be thinking about that as we look at sort of the trajectory of our campaign. And so in addition to resettlement, we do employment services, resource navigation, case management. We have a lot of people coming into the building every day. And so there is a lot of foot traffic in and out of our building all day long. And then we do provide some supplemental services. We have a place where kiddos can come while their parents are here, accessing services. We have a food pantry, and we also have a community garden. So here is our journey. Back in about 2015, 2014, we asked the question, can we grow or do we need to limit our services? The reason we were asking this question is because our space was very restricted. We had 8,900 square feet, and we were constantly running into each other. We were running out of office space, we were running out of study space. There were just so many opportunities that came our way that we really had to say no to on a regular basis because we just did not have the space to do it. So in our strategic plan, which it's always important to make sure that if you're going to be embarking on a capital campaign, that it is, of course, incorporated into your strategic plan, because it is a very large undertaking. So we had two goals that within the broader plan that addressed that. One is to assess our space needs and develop a plan, and conduct a capital campaign feasibility study. Sounds so simple, but each one of those has a lot within it. So the big question, how much space do we need? How do we even go about determining that? So we looked at what our current usage was and what we felt like we could project out in terms of usage and services that we really wanted to be able to provide but couldn't. We put some numbers, we put some student counts for our education, some resident counts for our women's services, and also what other kinds of additional services and space would we need to be able to do those services. We decided that we needed about 32,000 square feet. Well, that seemed like a pretty big building, and we were thinking, gosh, what would that price tag be? So fortunately, we had an architect on our board who did sort of a rendering of a 32,000 square foot building that would be everything that would meet all of our criteria. Some of our criteria was about being on the bus line, because a lot of our students and residents use the bus to be able to get to our facility. We definitely wanted it to be ADA accessible, because our current building had so many different levels and stairs that it was virtually impossible to make it ADA accessible, which, trust me, we explored that option multiple times. There were a few other criteria, like how do you have a building that's going to have housing as well as high traffic area with educational services, where there's going to be a lot of people in and out of the building. So there were a lot of factors to consider in what that space would look like. So our architect, Gary Landhauser, did a rendering, put some numbers to it, and we presented it to the board, and it had a $10 million price tag. And we said, oh my gosh, I don't think so. Let's go back to the drawing board. So that was obviously new construction, big 32,000 square feet structure. But how could we get the same? Maybe we stay where we are and add part of our services into another space. So that's kind of the idea that we started working with. But we went into an exploratory phase, and we said, okay, here's our criteria. Let's look at all the available properties. If building new is not really feasible, let's look at what already exists. What could we retrofit to meet our needs? And after looking at 35 different properties, we were no closer. So that's when we decided to look at the square block where we had a couple of houses and we had a community garden. And we were looking at, could we tear down those houses and put a building? So we went about acquiring some of the lots on that property in order to further explore that option. At the same time that we look at properties, we also had to do financial feasibility and sustainability. So one is operating and functioning out of a larger building going to be even feasible to imagine financially? And once we get there, can we sustain that? So those were the two big questions, and we did a lot of number crunching. We looked at space. We looked at what is our increase in our operational costs and what would our increased staffing costs be. So we imagined with the new services what kind of staff we would need to add in order to really fully utilize a larger space. Then we said, so we kind of settled on the idea of $5 million because we felt like 10 million, absolutely not. 5 million seems like a reasonable number. And it's about what the new building on our existing block to add education services there and to keep our housing services in our existing building. So we had this plan and we decided to contract with Amperage Marketing and Fundraising to conduct a feasibility study. So the question that they floated was, can we be successful in raising $5 million over a 3 to 5 year period? So in order to do that, in order to answer that question, they interviewed 35 different individuals within our community. Now, these are individuals who have capacity to give. They're individuals who've been involved in other capital campaigns and who have pretty much a proven track record. So they kind of know what they're looking for. They know what they're looking at in terms of investing in a project. And so the interviews also kind of help to determine, one, do you think $5 million is reasonable for Catherine McCauley Center to raise? And then two, would you give to it? And if you did, how much? So that's where we got a very lovely, I don't know if you can see, feasibility study finding. And they basically told us that, well, yes, the findings are you can raise $5 million, but people need to know that you are, more people need to know who you are. You need to be able to engage volunteers who have connections, who can actually help you. And so, so we knew we needed to do a lot more around awareness. And that was a big effort of ours. Right after we conducted the feasibility study, we had the Living Center East, we had a real estate agent approach us and say, St. Luke's Hospital is selling Living Center East. And this is a property at 1220 Fifth Avenue. And so that basically took us about 9 months to look at that property and say, could this facility meet our needs? We had to do a lot of checking on operational costs, what it would cost to completely renovate it, because clearly we don't want it to look like a nursing home. We want it to look like a place of welcome. And so there was going to have to be significant renovations to make that happen. So we had to cost all of that out to really see how feasible it would be. And then we had to negotiate with St. Luke's to be able to purchase the building. So then we said, okay, we've got it. We are ready to have a capital campaign. Now our budget let's see, I'm just going to go into like the elements of a capital campaign. Then I'm going to show you our case statement, because I think there's a lot of good information in that case statement that will help you to kind of see what aspects of a capital campaign need to be sort of presented to potential donors. So first of all, to have a successful capital campaign, you need volunteers. So it's not just anybody, it's somebody who can speak somewhat passionately about your organization, or at least learn enough about your organization that they are willing to speak about it in an enthusiastic way, because those volunteers are going to recruit other people to engage within the campaign. You have to have a prospect evaluation. So gathering names of people. So within our database, we had to look at all of our history of giving and say, who are our top prospects within our own database? But then we also had to engage some of those volunteers to help us come up with additional names of people that they felt would be potentially likely to give to our campaign. So once we have this whole list of people, we have to actually rate them. We have to say, what do we know about these people? What do we know about their capacity to give and their likelihood to give to CMC? What would that amount be? So there's actually a whole separate donor, like a donor rating team that would get together. So these folks obviously know people, and they also know essentially what their capacity to give is. So it felt very strange sitting around a table talking about, you know, how much could Sue Smith give to the campaign? Well, I know she gave $50,000 to this other campaign, but I don't think she knows much about CMC, so maybe she would give about $20,000. Well, we don't want to necessarily downplay her willingness to give to CMC. So those were the kinds of conversations, but it really helps to be able to know when you're approaching the donors about where are they, what kind of an ask are you going to make? For some people, it may be shocking, and for some people, it may be like, oh, is that all? No problem. I'll give you that $10,000. So that's why it's kind of, it has a lot of value and merit to go through that exercise. So then we go about doing training. So Amperage, I failed to mention that we engaged Amperage again to conduct the capital campaign. And when I say conduct, they basically guide us through the capital campaign. You basically need to think that you have one full-time employee that's going to be dedicated to this effort. So essentially our Director of Communications and Development and myself, we each tried to say that we were going to dedicate half of our time to the capital campaign, and the rest we were going to try to figure out how to do the rest of our full-time job by, you know, getting some other folks. We did hire an administrative coordinator that did kind of support us in some of our work. So it is important to think about your own staff capacity. So one, I would say, do you have a good donor database? If you don't have a strong donor base, you may want to think about developing your donor database. And when I say database, I mean your list of donors, making sure you have enough people that you can pull from your own resources. And then you also need to really dedicate time to staff time to the effort and figure out really how are you going to do that. So Amperage came in and trained, did several different volunteer training sessions. We engaged volunteers to take their own portfolio. So they took assignments. They basically went through the list. I know these people. I'm happy to reach out to these 10 people. So each person had their list of assignments. And when they would go out, we would also make sure that they had naming opportunities, and I'll show you that in our case statement. So I did, before we move on to the case statement, I did want to say that we did find our future home at 1220 Fifth Avenue, which was the Living Center East building. And amazingly, the size of the building was 32,000 square feet. Remember back to the $10 million building? That's how much it was. So here we are with an older building built in like 1971 that we could retrofit. So we did say, yes, we can do this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so that I can find the case statement. First of all, let me see. Well, before I show you the case statement, let me show you the awesome video. That's another component that Ambridge did. They have some amazing marketing folks and production people who can put together a really compelling story within a limited period of time. So I am going to show you our video. Share that screen. And make it bigger, and here it starts really fast, so you have to go like right at the very beginning.
When I first came here, I didn't know any English. If I couldn't find it sexy here, I wouldn't be successful.
Empowerment. We need
Are you seeing this?
mercy. You brave.
Are you
Yeah, it
seeing
looks great,
this?
Paula.
What?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, great.
Community. These values make the Catherine McCauley Center a place of welcome. Bienvenidos. Cariño.
The Catherine McCauley Center is just this wonderful place of welcome. All the sisters of mercy. And a lot of times people talk about this concept of hospitality. And the Catherine McCauley Center is that.
Founded in 1989 by the Sisters of Mercy, the Catherine McCauley Center's mission of offering hope and opportunity for education and supportive services helps hundreds in our community every year, whether it's through adult basic education, transitional housing for women, or welcoming refugees. The center's impact can be felt every day. In 2009, they saved my life. At one of the darkest moments of her life, Sarah needed a place to live, and the Catherine McCauley Center welcomed her with a warm bed to sleep in and caring hearts to confide in. The services at CMC they give you the tools where you need to go, and it's not like you do the work for you. That's not what this place is about. It's about letting you find your way. The culture of Catherine McCauley Center is one of community. It's really about helping people and allowing people to find the best in themselves and to build the skills and find the stability they need in their lives so that they can have a better life for themselves and their family.
When I first came here, I didn't know any English.
Rogelio arrived in Cedar Rapids from Mexico at 19 years old with his 3-month-old daughter, seeking a better life for his family. A visit to the Catherine McCauley Center got him started on that path.
Learning English is the most important because it completely changed my life. I'm able to solve my feelings with my friends, with other people, with glory, solve the what I need, and we are the same people. I fled my country when I was 14.
When Jacques arrived in the United States, the Catherine McCauley Center, along with a few family members, greeted him at the airport to welcome him to his new life.
It was like, wow, these people are great. And they welcome me, they don't even know me, and did not even see me before. That's impressed me a lot.
With help from the Catherine McCauley Center, Jacques has settled into his new life in Iowa.
They taught me how to live in America. And especially what I like is they taught me how to live on my own, to depend on myself.
Tara, Rogelio, and Jacques are just 3 of the thousands helped by the Catherine McCauley Center over the past 3 decades. The Catherine McCauley Center's adult basic education program serves more than 450 students from 50 countries. Its refugee and immigrant services program serves more than 200 refugees each year, helping them resettle in Iowa, connect to jobs, and work towards self-sufficiency. The Transitional Housing Program serves women experiencing homelessness, with dozens of women passing through its doors every year. But now is a critical time. While the needs keep increasing, the center's current building is no longer adequate to meet the needs of clients, staff, and volunteers, and offers no space for further expansion.
Just like most nonprofits, we make do with what we have. But if you were to walk in here on any given day, you would see we're busting at the seams.
Every available space is being used. The kitchen, our break room, our conference room, even sometimes the lobby will have folks just sit right down in the middle of all of the activity and just start working together because they want to get to work and there really isn't any other space. Our volunteers really want that private space so that they can eliminate distraction. In addition to a lack of space for one-on-one tutoring sessions, the Catherine McCauley Center is not ADA accessible. Its workspaces are overcrowded, and there's not enough space for large group programming.
We really need some more space just to welcome people, but then also create that sense of community where people in a central location understand that all the support systems are all here together and realize that they can make a difference in their own lives because of the connections that they make.
Join us to help our community continue to be a place of welcome by supporting the campaign to expand the Catherine McCauley Center. This $5 million capital campaign will enable the Catherine McCauley Center to expand the opportunities it gives those who need a helping hand to transform their lives. A place of welcome will allow a new center at 1220 Fifth Avenue Southeast in Cedar Rapids, just blocks from its current building. This will allow the center to expand programming to meet growing needs. Your support for a place of welcome will provide space to increase one-on-one tutoring in a more private setting. Need additional beds for women in the transitional housing program. It will mean larger areas for classes, volunteer training, and community meetings to allow more people to be part of CMC's mission. Your support will allow larger areas for a computer lab, the food pantry, and childcare, so that those we serve can build skills, increase stability, and make connections.
Our future depends on an inclusive community that welcomes, respects, and supports the diversity of ideas and individuals. The outreach that this center provides, I think, is essential to that.
We go along in our normal daily lives, we don't always think about all the services that we provide. There's so many that without them, we would be a very different place.
You may be supporting someone someday that is a parent of your kid's best friend, or maybe it's your grandchild's babysitter, or maybe it's just your next door neighbor. And you may never know that they were impacted by the dollars. What we do here at the Catherine McCauley Center changes people's lives.
AMC is a really special place. People know that if they have a need, this is a safe place for them to ask for help. And we are ready to extend that hand and to ask how can we help them.
Extend your hand to more people like Tara, Rogelio, and Jean. Transform more lives through learning, empowerment, and compassion. Join us in building a hopeful, inclusive community.
help the Catherine McCauley Center continue to be a place of welcome.
All right. It gets me every time. I have seen that video. I can't even say dozens. I feel like it's almost hundreds and I just always still enjoy watching it. Except for myself. I don't like looking at myself in the video. Luckily, I don't have braces anymore and my hair is white instead of blonde. So there we go. Time passes. All right. So now I'm going to share our case statement. And make sure I'm on the right screen. Because I do feel like so many of the elements of a capital campaign are encompassed within the actual case statement itself. So again, Ambridge does a fabulous job of putting together material in a way that kind of creates that compelling case that's really visual. And so you'll see a lot of the images from the footage in the video within this actual case statement. So, oh, this is not the right version. So let's see if I can. Well, you'll get to look at it like a book. Okay, so hopefully, so you see here on our left, you know, it's just helping people to understand our mission, our vision, and our values. And then an introductory narrative about, like, think for a moment, if your life was, you know, but fleeing from your home, struggling with addiction, you know, all the different scenarios that our clients come in with, where would you turn? Turn to the Catherine McCauley Center. Nice little quote for me. And then we have a history of Catherine McCauley Center. So I wrote a letter, kind of introducing myself in the center, but you saw in the video, Steve Oval and his wife, Susan, were our campaign co-chairs. Steve had been our board president while we were going through the feasibility study. And once he was past president and we were trying to figure out who would be the best person to kind of lead this effort and be the face of this effort in the community, it just seemed really natural that Steve and Susan would be there because he was so instrumental in helping us to acquire the property and to envision our new space. So giving people who know nothing about CMC a good sense of what our history. We had a little house on stilts back in 1989 across from Mercy Medical Center. Then in '93, we moved to the building on the corner of 4th Avenue and 10th Street, which was an old convent of the Sisters of Mercy. So that is where we resided for 27 years. So because we moved in 2020. So you can see the growth in our services, which really is what kind of created the demand for space. This is one of the houses that we have when I talked about the block with the 2 houses in the garden. And amazingly enough, the building that we found is actually kitty corner from our 2 houses. So it was actually a perfect location for us because now instead of being a couple of blocks away from our existing houses, we could be just right across the street. So then we have Tara's story, and it's a very compelling story. We have Jacques' story. And what you find when you talk to people is that for some people, like, because we have such a variety of services, some people will really gravitate towards one area and some people towards another area. So then we talk about, and here is how long ago it's been. It's been 5 years ago now. So in 2018, these were the stats that we had. And it talks about how we're a place of connection, a place of learning, a place of stability. Those words are within our values and they're also within our mission statement. So it's basically saying, here's like the scope of our services. And finally, we need a larger facility. So this picture on the upper right corner is no exaggeration. There were like 5 offices crammed into one small space. We ended up having to clean out storage rooms and our archives and back closets in the basement in order to make staff offices. And so back in 2015, we thought we were bursting at the seams. But once we added our refugee and immigrant services, we were absolutely bursting at the seams. So this really talks about what we need. We also needed a better parking lot because we shared it with the Immaculate Conception Church, which was problematic on special religious holidays and at other times, funerals and so on. So interestingly, at one point in our existence, we could fit every single staff person around this conference table. But then as we grew, people were all around the perimeter. So usually we would have like a full circle around the table outside of that. And this is the lobby I was referencing where people would just sit down. This was a high traffic space. And people literally would sit down and just try to study. Then this is a rendering of our building. So it's basically saying here are all of the different spaces. And here is what we can do with our new space. So we had to really, again, take a considerable effort to really look at each of the spaces and say, how are we going to use them? Then a very important component, everybody's big question, what is the $5 million going for? So our cost breakdown of the project was the cost of purchasing the building, the other property purchases and pre-development phase, then the construction and renovation phase, and then professional fees. And then a very important component of our $5 million campaign was the $1 million endowment. So the idea behind the endowment is that this would help. We could take 5% each year from that. So that would be $50,000. That would help us with the increased operating costs. We established that it would cost about $90,000 more a year to be able to function in this larger space. And so that $50,000 a year would go a long way to addressing that additional operating costs. Donors really, really loved them. They loved the idea that we were thinking about sustainability. We weren't just thinking about getting in the building and getting it all built out, but really, what is it going to take? So fortunately, we already had a $1.5 million endowment. So we could show that we have experiencing and managing an endowment, and we already take 5% annually. So this would just be over and above in addition to that. And then, as I briefly mentioned, is that there are naming opportunities. So we basically went through this chart and said, okay, how much would a study room be? We had 4 private study spaces in the old building. We would have 9 study spaces here. We had no classroom space, and we would have 3 classroom spaces in the new building. So obviously a large classroom space would be valued more than a study room. Staff office would not be valued as high as a study room because there's actual services happening in there. On second floor is where our transitional housing space would be. So how much would in this yellow part here, would a resident room be? And then the other spaces within that. So pretty much except for bathrooms and pretty much every space except for a bathroom was a naming opportunity. So you can see here that it's valued from anywhere from $10,000 for staff offices and work to $15,000 for our education study rooms and other types of shared meeting rooms, to $50,000 for the childcare room. And then finally, larger naming opportunities like our learning kitchen, our outdoor courtyards, our lobby. But then we have our 3 service areas. So those were each valued at $250,000. So those were all actually named. So I would say pretty much most of our spaces are named. So named, the ones that aren't are really our staff offices. But it really, for some people, they would be like, oh, I can give 5,000. But when we would present them with the naming opportunities, they're like, well, I could probably stretch and give 10,000 and put my name on one of the education offices, which by the way, is like right off of the entryway. So many people will see the names. And it's really interesting as we give tours and the names are actually on the door nameplates. People will say like, oh, look, so-and-so gave. And that also is a compelling case for, a lot of people who are giving to campaigns will say, well, who else is giving? So being able to maintain a donor list of who's currently given to the campaign was very helpful because people would want to know and they'd say, well, if so-and-so gave, then they must have done their due diligence and I want to add my name to that list. So then, of course, we want to make sure that people know that there are other types of giving. As you all know, there's planned gifts, because the planned gift could also be something that we could include. But just encouraging people to look at other ways that they might be able to make the most out of their giving. They might want to honor somebody. We have several rooms that don't have the donor's name, but has one of their relatives that they've honored with that naming opportunity. So then I mentioned the volunteers. So the Capital Campaign Steering Committee is really essential to have people who are meeting with the staff team on a regular basis. They're really helping to make sure that things are moving along. They will often be the ones to reach out to the other volunteers that have volunteered to go out and make asks and kind of make sure that they're continuing to make progress in meeting with the donors and making those and sharing the case for giving to the Place of Welcome campaign. So they really play a very critical role. The Honorary Steering Committee is really people who are known within the community that have had some connection to the center in the past and are willing to lend their name to the campaign. So most of the people on this list had a very strong connection. Some had some type of connection, but really believed in the mission and said, absolutely, yes. Not only will we lend our name, but we'll give a gift as well, because that is a requirement for all of our campaign steering committee and our honorary steering committee. Early on in the campaign, we had to have board of directors that was kind of a first phase of giving, was getting all of our board to commit to a gift to the campaign. So our giving opportunities spanned anywhere from 1 to 3 to 5 years. So if getting a gift over 5 years, if they could do $5,000 a year for 5 years, we're certainly going to do that. So we wanted to make sure that we gave a long enough period of time in order to allow people to give a more substantial gift over time. So we did get 100% of giving from our board of directors, and then we had staff. This was interesting because some of our staff don't make a lot of money, so we had to get creative in terms of how do you get everybody on the staff to commit. So even if it was a $5 gift, we allowed staff payroll deduction to just make it easy and feel pretty painless to give. So we did get 100% participation from our staff as well. And that goes a long way when you're meeting with donors to be able to say, not only has our steering committee and honorary committee and our board of directors given, but our staff have given as well. And there we go. That is the end of the case statement. So it was very fun to meet with donors and to be able to talk through the case statement, to be able to show them the video, to be able to ask questions and to be able to see where their interests lie. So one of the really challenging things is that we basically started our campaign in 2019. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020. It was the pandemic, COVID. So we all just kind of went into sequestered into our homes, which did not allow for one-on-one meetings very easily. And so that really kind of hindered our progress. And but we managed to make it through. And it really wasn't until last fall that we did our capital campaign celebration. We actually completed our campaign more in April of last year, so April of 2022. So it's about a 3.5-year campaign, which typically I think you would be able to complete your campaign in about half that time. But we also had some construction that we had to do within the building. So that's why we delayed about 6 months to be able to, before we brought people in and celebrated our campaign. Another interesting thing that happened is that, yay, we moved in July 13th of 2020, and it was so exciting. And we were still trying to figure out how to put all these in-kind donation of office furniture in our space and make things work. And then on August 10th of 2020, we found ourselves in the basement stairwell and heard our roof blow off our building. So all of our brand new carpet, ceiling tile, lighting, drywall, paints, just a ton of damage to our building. So in a month, and then felt like we were back to square one. But in every tragedy, you look for the blessing, and there really were some blessings. I mean, it blew off some old lighting that was on top of the building with the roof. And so we were able to get beautiful new lighting on the side of our building that was much more effective and just lit up the building much more, much better. So I'm just going to show you super quick the end of my PowerPoint so you can see our new buildings.
As Paula's screen sharing, get your questions ready.
Yep. So you just make this into a bigger thing. So yeah, this is our building, and we love it, and it has been quite the journey, and we are happy it's over. So, questions?
Thank you so much, Paula. Those of you who have questions, you feel free to unmute, otherwise throw them in the chat and I can do that as well. I think maybe a couple of people popped on with some.
Yeah, I have some questions. Thank you so much for sharing that information and congratulations. We are kind of at the spot where we've done a lot of the research and found a great need that we have. At what point do you start engaging with spending that money and hiring designers and engineers and doing the actual renovation? Is it, after the campaign's launched and you just hang on to that campaign until you've met the goal, or do you wait until you raise all the funds before you start building, and kind of what was your process there?
That's a super good question. So we actually, once we had our board commitments, and we also had, failed to mention, our lead gift with the Hall Prime Foundation of $1.25 million. That was a great endorsement, but we also knew we had that commitment. And we were able to then kind of move into spending money. We also took a line of credit from Hills Bank. And so they, we borrowed the money. And as we received the money in the door, we would basically, it would go into the account to pay off expenses. So it was all happening simultaneously. Once we got that lead gift and had our board commitments, we were able to really kind of dive in and start spending the money. However, we did engage with Amperage once we knew, trying to remember exactly when it was. But I think it was somewhere between the feasibility study and actually determining that that building was going to be the space. But I recommend, if you're going to use a campaign consultant, getting going early so that you can understand all the aspects. And I cannot tell you enough how valuable the feasibility study was, because some of the 35 people, most of the 35 people that they interviewed ended up giving to the campaign.
What percentage of campaign gifts were from new donors versus existing donors?
Ooh, Haley, you're putting me on the spot. That's a great question. I need to look that up. I don't know. But I do know that we did get some brand new donors that had never given to Catherine McCauley Center before. I will tell you one very interesting story about purchasing. We'd never purchased a donor list before, ever. And so we spent I think $175 purchasing this list through Amperage. And we sent it, it's basically sending out like a blind ask to people who may not know anything about you. We had one couple give us a $50,000 gift, and we had never engaged with them before. The reason they gave to us is they had been following the work we had been doing throughout the derecho and through resettlement and so on. And so they said, we've been watching you in the news. So there's another tip, get your name out there. As much awareness that you can possibly get, the better. And so that was worth the whole experience of purchasing a list. I'm sorry, it's 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Audrey at the Bike Library. Thanks, Paula and Ellie. With the list of people that you give to the consultant for the feasibility study, that comes from your donor database, people have already given before. Could it also be people that you maybe haven't asked, but are part of your network?
Yes. Melissa, do you have a quick answer on that?
We do encourage that you include all of those within your campaign. They may not be folks, though, that maybe necessarily are your lead gift donors and that you're concentrating on that piece of it they've never given, but that I think you certainly want to provide everybody that opportunity to give. you know, particularly if they do, I mean, in Catherine McCauley Center's case, it may have been a volunteer or someone who had donated goods to their food pantry or transitional housing, but maybe didn't give a monetary gift, but still they're invested into the Catherine McCauley Center. And so being able to invite, whether it's through that direct mail piece there towards the end of the campaign, or that is certainly a great way to start engaging them and giving them that opportunity to give.
Yeah, our feasibility study was 35 people. And so that was separate from our prospect list and the donor rating, although the people that we interviewed, their what they share is confidential, but their gift range, they will give you a range. And so you have a sense of at least what those 35 people might potentially give.
Super. Any other questions for Paula? All right. Well, I have just a couple of wrap-up items, but first of all, thank you so much, Paula, for sharing with us. I heard a little bit of this story before and immediately reached out and was like, we need to share this. This is great information. So we really appreciate it. And I'm sure that you'll be hearing from some folks with specific questions in the future.
There's so much to share that, you know, just, I certainly didn't want to get too deep into the specifics because that's where your consultant comes in, but I'm certainly happy to answer anything individually that people would want to ask.
Super.
I was going to say, if you could link Amperage information